Hey guys, what is up? My name is PandaMaster, and welcome to my spoiler-free review of The Vigil. So, this is a supernatural horror film that is actually the director Keith Thomas's directorial debut. So, he wrote and directed this film, which is basically a Jewish mythology based horror movie about basically they're not so much today, but in the past of the Jewish faith, specifically the Orthodox Jewish community, they would keep vigil over a deceased member of the community. And so usually it would be a family member, but in certain cases where there wasn't anyone to watch over, there would be a paid showman, which is, yeah, just they basically just keep watch over the body for a night. But it's discovered, that this showman, he finds out that this person was being haunted by this demon called a Mazik, and so all this other stuff happens, and there's just this big old thing, and yeah, big supernatural horror creepy movie. So this originally premiered at TIFF in September of 2019, and then after COVID happened, it released internationally in places that knew what they were doing. Meanwhile, the US struggled along, and it was eventually released a couple weeks ago, something like that. It was February 26th, however long that's been. Actually, no, that wouldn't be a couple weeks ago. That would be like Monday. No, last Friday. There we go. So almost a week ago. It was released in theaters and on premium, well, kind of premium video on demand. It was cheaper than most. I didn't have to pay $20. I paid $7 to rent it, which is more expensive than most, but not like premium VOD. So I don't know what they consider that to be. But anyway, let's talk about this. First off, I mean, this is one of those it's really cool to see a horror film based off of Jewish mythology, and that's what a lot of people have been saying, as a lot of supernatural horror films are based off of Christian themes and that sort of stuff, where you don't see a lot from the Jewish mythology. One, because there isn't really a lot of basis for it. There was an interview with the director who said, there's not much you can take from Jewish mythology to make a horror film, and so he kind of reached back into the roots of Jewish mythology, and going back towards older times, because the modern Jewish faith doesn't really have any room for that, and so kind of going back into historical interpretations and mythology and that sort of thing. And so yeah, this is a very atmospheric film, so I definitely wholeheartedly recommend this to any horror fans out there. I think this is a really good film. I don't necessarily think this does anything to necessarily, I think I said that twice in the sentence already, but break the mold or do anything specifically new, right? I think if you've seen other really good supernatural horror movies, I think you're going to get a very similar vibe. I think the biggest thing that sets itself apart here is that, its roots in Jewish mythology, right? And just sort of the incorporation of that throughout the film. Other than that, I didn't really notice anything that, did anything new. And so, that being said, everything in here is really good. I still think this is a great film. I think the cinematography is really, really great. It was done by Zach Cooperstein. Don't know if that's how I pronounce it, but there you go. I think that really, really good job. It has a lot of suffocating moments in it where it's all about, you're very tensed up. And I love that about horror movies when they don't focus on jump scares, because as I'm thinking through the movie, I don't think there were any real genuine jump scares. There were a couple moments where it was like teetering on that line, but I don't think it really had any genuine jump scares, and I appreciate that about a film. Not that I think jump scares are inherently bad, but I think in the 2000s and 2010s, a lot of horror movies only relied on jump scares, and it just really tarnished the horror genre. And I grew up hating horror movies because that's all they were, and so I just didn't enjoy watching. Like, I wouldn't watch horror movies, and it wasn't until just a few years ago that I really got into the horror genre. And so I'm really happy that, this movie continues to stray away from that method of horror, because it's not, again, not that it can't be used well, it's just a lot of horror movies overuse it to the point that it doesn't have any actual substantial plot to go off of. It's just a movie that is trying to make you piss yourself. And, the plot is definitely at the forefront here, which I very much appreciate. And it's really interesting. Like, it really got me interested in Jewish mythology and figuring out, like, all this stuff. Like, is this real? Like, is this an actual thing? And it's also got a fair amount of Yiddish in it, so, which is a language from the Orthodox Jewish community, which is kind of like a mix of, like, Hebrew, Arabic, and German. It's kind of all over the place. But in terms of emphasizing, I guess, or promoting Jewish culture, I think this movie does some cool stuff. So I would say, that's the big distinctive thing that sets this film apart. I don't think it's necessarily enough to be like, ooh, this is like an amazing movie or anything, but I do still think it's great because there's a lot of really cool things that this movie takes from other really, really good horror films and incorporates. Like I said, I think atmosphere is a very important thing to have in a good horror movie, and trying to inspire fear without using jump scares. And I think this movie does a really great job with that. And so I think that the direction and the cinematography both go hand in hand to create a really nice claustrophobic atmosphere. Also, the majority of this film takes place in a small house, right? So in terms of setting, that also helps to create this atmosphere and this mood and this tone. And we get some flashbacks and different other things where we see other areas. And essentially, this movie deals a lot about guilt, I guess, and preying on pain and trauma. And so it has a lot of really good moments with that, and about understanding that things might not necessarily be our fault, or really looking at how much our guilt really does gnaw at us if there's no resolution and all of that. And so there's a lot of mental horror going on here, a lot of psychological horror. There we go. So while I would easily characterize this as a supernatural horror film, there is some psychological horror throughout as well, and I think it does a really good job of balancing the two. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this to horror fans. I think that you will enjoy it, especially if you are into supernatural horror, because I think, trying to remember the last supernatural horror movie that I've seen. I couldn't tell you, honestly. Like, I watched I watched the Insidious movies over the holidays. I think the first two. Yeah, I watched the first two. And so, but in terms of like new supernatural horror movies, I can't remember the last one I watched. So I feel like it's been a while since we've gotten a really good supernatural horror film. I know I reviewed Saint Maud, but I don't think there's anything supernatural about that. It's like a different type of horror. And so it's nice. It's good. I was a little upset. I saw an article that's like, oh, The Vigil's the first great horror film of 2021. And I'm like, man, where's my Saint Maud love? It's really good. Go watch Saint Maud. Like, if I had to pick one over the other, I would pick Saint Maud. But I still think this is very great. And again, I think if you are a fan of horror, I'm sure you will enjoy this. So, but yeah, let me know what you guys thought of The Vigil. If you have seen it, down in the comments below. Let's have a conversation. I'd love to do that. I love to talk about stuff. If you guys haven't figured that out already by my content, there you go. And so, if you like this video, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys next time for whatever it is I'm doing. All right, see ya.